was October 1st. That fresh autumn breeze was in the air. It felt like fall, my favorite season. It was my boyfriend Carter and I's first fall living together in our new home. I wanted to surprise Carter by decorating the place with fall and Halloween-themed decorations before he got home from work one day. I thought it would be cute. I bought a few things from a nearby Marshall's and a few other stores, and I also looked on different apps and websites, most notably Facebook Marketplace. I simply typed in fall decorations, and one listing really caught my attention. It was a picture of a big green plastic container, which contained a bunch of fall decorations. I clicked on it for more details, and more or less it said everything must go, entire container of fall-themed decorations for sale for cheap. The price was only $20. It was a steal if that entire big container was full of decorations. At the bottom of the ad, it also said, selling other stuff, clearing out house, everything must go. Check my profile. So I clicked his profile and looked at some of the other listings he had. There was a weird assortment of things this guy was selling. An allegedly new iPhone for $700, a few articles of women's clothing, and Christmas decorations. There were others, but I didn't go through all of them. The profile itself was kind of low-key. Everything was private. The man's name was Cody, and his profile picture was a close-up of a gray trucker's cap on a guy's head, but his face was covered by the brim of the hat. The cover photo was a blurry photo of a lake. I messaged the profile, and he replied instantly. I asked what kind of decorations were in the container, and he said all sorts. Tableware, outdoor decorations, etc. So I excitedly told the man I would come by them today if he were available. He confirmed he would be around later on, closer to 9 p.m., as that's when he'd get home from work. He sent me an address. I looked up the address on Google Maps Street View. It was not in the best town, honestly, but the house looked completely normal. 2 cars in the driveway in the Street View picture, lawn kept nice, so I agreed to meet. I had my friend Sally come with me just to be safe. I went to pick up Sally across town, and we were off to this Cody person's house. It was a half-hour drive. Sally and I had some time to catch up on the drive there. When we got off the highway entering the town that the house was in, Sally started half joking around about how sketchy the area was. I say half joking around because I know she was saying that partially to be funny and make light of the situation, but also because everyone just kind of knows this really isn't the best town. It was dark out though, so honestly we didn't see much besides streetlights, traffic lights, and some storefronts. As we got closer, I saw my phone screen turning on as it vibrated in the cup holder of my car. At the next light, I checked my phone and saw that it was messages from Cody on Messenger. He said, "When you get here, you can come right in." I showed it to Sally and she said, "What the hell?" We both could agree that that was a bit uncomfortable and that we'd ring the doorbell anyway. We pulled up to the house, and surprisingly, there were no cars in the driveway. There were dim lights on in the house, though, that could barely be seen through the closed blinds of the windows. I messaged Cody back saying, "We're here, can you come to the front?" Sally and I both watched the house as I waited for a response. And then we both noticed at the same exact time, at one of the windows, the blinds slightly shift, indicating someone was watching us through them. Then, just as quickly as we noticed it, the opening in the blinds closed. A few seconds later, the front door opened, and Cody messaged me back saying, "I'm at the door, you can come in." It was a bit of an unsettling situation, and I was just happy I brought Sally along. The two of us got out of my car and walked closer to the front door. Before getting too close, I called out Cody's name a few times, only to get no response. Sally whispered we should leave. I took a few steps closer and said "Cody" one more time really loud, and there was no response. I turned and whispered, "Let's go," and we started walking back to the car, when suddenly I heard a guy say, "Hey, yes, I'm here, inside." We turned and saw a man at the doorway, but only about half of him. He was like peering only half of his body around the door. He waved us inside. Sally and I cautiously turned back and started walking back to the door. As I got closer, he fully opened the door, but then also walked out of view. We walked up the steps and into the house, keeping the front door open, and right away got hit with a strong scent, like that cotton scent from an old person's house mixed with something very unpleasant. We heard fast and heavy footsteps moving away into another room, followed by his voice saying, "It's over in here, come here." His voice was freakishly deep, like it was intimidating. I made sure Sally was right by my side before entering the adjacent room. We were faced with a very weird sight. A dimly lit living room with a depressing pinkish red carpet and really old-looking furniture. But the smell in this room was putrid. It smelled like actual death. In the middle of the room was a red container with a green lid on top of it. There was this Cody man standing just over the container. This was the first time I got a good, clear look at the man, and he was not a friendly-looking man. He invited me over to come open the container. I took note of the fact that this container was not the same color as the green container that was in the picture on the Facebook ad. It also was a completely different shape from the looks of it. I asked him to open it himself, and he said, "Well, you're no fun." That comment already had Sally and I inching backwards in the direction of the front door. But when he lifted the lid off the container and we were suddenly blasted with another putrid smell, we turned for the door and left in a hurry without looking back until we got to the car. Sally kept telling me to hurry up. By the time my car was on, all I know is the front door to the house was already closed. I don't know if he was watching us through the window again. We were gone very quickly. We never actually saw what was in that container. It was definitely not decorations, though. After telling Carter about all of this, he asked for the address of the place, and I told him not to go there. He assured me he wouldn't, he just wanted to look up the house, so I gave it to him. The next day, he returned home later than usual from work, and he told me he stopped by the house, and an older woman answered the door, insisting that she lives there alone. He knew I wasn't lying though, because I showed him all the Facebook messages with the guy, which included the address. Upon looking up the records of that address, it does list the owner as a woman in her late 60s. This was an incredibly disturbing and unexplainable experience. From now on, when buying stuff online, I avoid going to people's houses. It was 2019 when this happened. I remember specifically because it was the year I was living on my own in Asheville, North Carolina. I moved here for a temporary job, and it was an excuse for me to live on my own for the first time. I was 22 years old and just out of college. I had an apartment in downtown. I could walk to most things I needed, but I also had my car for when I wanted to branch out or venture out of town. The thing I loved about Asheville and North Carolina in general was the sheer amount of hiking trails. I'd been to many around town, but one I hadn't been to was DuPont State Forest. One day I decided to go. The drive was just under an hour from Asheville. It was a random Wednesday in October. The leaves were starting to change, and it was the perfect time for a hike. I didn't have work that day, and it being a work day for everyone else, it meant I'd probably have the trails all to myself. I got to the parking area for the park, and I found where one of the trails began. I walked for a while, and the trail was serene. I was the only one out there that day. It was a cloudy day, and we'd been getting a lot of rain that week, which was more of a reason I wanted to go, because the trail would lead to some nice waterfalls called Triple Falls and High Falls, and the waterfalls would be more impressive after a few days of rainfall. I only had to hike about 0.4 miles before getting to the Triple Falls, which was a really cool sight. A little piece of trivia, a scene in The Hunger Games was filmed at this waterfall. I took a few videos and pictures as I sat on a rock for a bit. I noticed a woman in the woods on the trail. She was looking at me. I waved at her, trying to be polite. Then she just turned around and slowly walked deeper into the woods until she was out of sight. Not really something I gave a second thought to. Anyway, I wasn't tired yet. I had literally just started hiking, so I didn't sit for too long. I got up and headed back to the trail. I didn't want to try climbing the rocks of the waterfall because they were incredibly slippery. I continued to ascend up the trail and eventually came to the higher point of the falls called High Falls. I took a few more videos and pictures here and sat on another dry rock for a bit. I swear I felt a sense of deja vu when I saw that woman again in the woods by the trail. Once again she was staring me down. I didn't wave this time. I instead looked down at my phone, pretending not to notice or care. I couldn't help but glance up after like 10 seconds, and now she was gone. If I had to guess, the woman was like 55. She had short, grayish blonde hair from the looks of it. But again, she was pretty far away, so this was all just what I saw of her from a distance. I didn't see which way she went, but whatever way it was, I wanted to go the opposite. I kept walking the direction I'd been walking, and eventually came to another landmark of the trail, the covered bridge. I once again stopped here to take a scenic video and a few photos. I drank a bit of my water and then looked at the end of the bridge from the side I had just walked from. I saw that woman. I swear I didn't see her there before I started taking videos and pictures. I also didn't hear anyone walking behind me. She was once again staring right at me as if I were doing something wrong. I was getting annoyed. I started walking over to her and said, "Excuse me," but she just turned around and started walking away. Actually, the speed at which she was walking away for someone at her age was unsettling. I almost felt concern at the possibility that she may have been somebody with special needs that needed help, but I didn't convince myself to go chasing after her. I just leaned on the edge of the bridge for a few minutes before deciding to turn back. I had already been hiking for about 45 minutes, and it would take another 45 to get back down to the car. Walking back down the trail I came, in the direction that woman had gone, I passed a younger woman walking her dog, so I decided to stop her and ask if she'd seen an older woman pass by. She said no, and just trying to make conversation about it, talk to somebody about it, I told her how I kept seeing that woman popping out of nowhere and looking at me, then just walking off. She laughed and said that's really strange. I didn't want to take up too much of her time, so after we both shared a laugh about it, I continued on my way. The entire way down the trail, I grew a bit paranoid that I'd see that woman lurking around in the background somewhere again, but all was quiet on the way down. I passed one other person who gave me a friendly smile and a nod. Other than that, I made it back to my car undisturbed. Later that day, I went on a date with a girl I was seeing there. We went to our favorite local bar to get some pumpkin spice beers and watch baseball. I told her about the woman on the trail, and she found it amusing, because honestly it did sound funny. After that, I went home. Fast forward to that night when I was in bed. I hardly ever wake up in the middle of the night. I'm a pretty heavy sleeper normally, so me waking up in the middle of the night in the dark was unusual. I was still coming to when I heard something at the foot of my bed. I looked up and saw the figure of a woman at the foot of my bed. I felt as though my insides had just fallen out of my body. I started screaming so loud that I'm sure my neighbors could have heard it, even with the windows closed. I started crawling against my headboard, trying to distance myself as much as possible from the female figure at the foot of my bed. Then she just turned and walked out of the room. I stopped screaming now, more so trying to just catch my breath and slow my rapidly beating heart. I flicked on the lamp and started shouting, "Who's there?" I listened, but there was dead silence. I grabbed the knife I had in the nightstand next to my bed and jumped out of bed. I flicked on every light switch I passed until the entire apartment was lit up. There was no one there. Not in the closets, not behind a couch, not under any beds, and so I called my father. I didn't know what else to do. I needed to share what just happened with somebody. My father groggily picked up the phone, and after explaining to him, he said I must have hallucinated it while I was still in my half-asleep state. He said I wasn't fully awake yet, and so I could have been seeing things. I knew deep down he was probably right, but it didn't make the image I saw any less real-looking or horrifying. And then I told him about the woman in the park, and how the figure at my bed actually resembled her. He said if anything, that further proves his point that my brain conjured up a familiar image from earlier that day. Somehow, I went back to sleep that night, with my bedroom door barricaded with my dresser just in case. It wasn't until 2 days later that I heard from my mom that her sister in Germany died. I'd never met my aunt. She'd been basically estranged from my mom, as she hadn't left Germany in over 25 years. My mom and uncle flew to Germany to attend the funeral, and it wasn't until she got back home and I saw the prayer card with my aunt's face on it that once again I felt like my organs dropped out of my body when I realized she looked identical to the woman I saw on the trail that day and hallucinated at the foot of my bed. This story shook my whole family, especially because I told my dad about all of it and the hallucination before we even got news of my aunt's passing. I was born a Catholic, but never found myself to be super religious after confirmation. But goddamn, does this really send shivers down my spine and make me question what exactly I believe in. My friend Carlos and I like to do stupid things together. We've been friends since we were 10, and when we were 21, we became roommates. We lived in Brunswick, Georgia, where we grew up. A little coastal town that had its pros and cons, but overall was an okay place to grow up. But it got boring as we entered our 20s. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. While we did live there, we knew about a creepy-looking house that differed from the rest of the houses in town, in that it looked like it was built in a different century. It had long been abandoned, and we and our friends would make up stories about its history. It was mid-October, and everyone was in Halloween mode. People were doing Halloween-themed activities like haunted houses and corn mazes and such. We thought it would be fun one Friday night to go break into that house and explore. So after we were both home from our jobs, we both grabbed baseball bats to bring with us, stopped for some fast food and beers on the way, and drove to the house. We parked all the way down the road just not to be suspicious. The houses around there were not that close together, so each property was pretty big, which meant we were less likely to get caught snooping around. We both grabbed a couple beers each and threw them in our backpacks. Not sure why we thought we were going to drink in there, but along with that, we stuffed our baseball bats into the sides, just so no one would see us walking around with baseball bats in our hands late at night looking like trouble. We quietly walked down the street, just whispering to each other. It took less than 5 minutes to get to the house. It was so dark on this part of the street because this house, along with the house across the street, had no lights on. There weren't any street lights on the street. Whatever light there may have been would have had to come from one of the few houses with their lights on. From here on, we used our flashlights we brought. The front lawn had a bunch of dirt patches, and the patches of grass were overgrown. Lots of weeds everywhere, it seemed. We walked around to the backyard to look for an entry point, because doing that out front seemed stupid for obvious reasons. Shockingly, the back door was already unlocked. The place wasn't boarded up or anything. The back windows weren't even smashed. We knew that the place was abandoned though, everybody did. We walked right in. Navigating inside of there would have been impossible had it not been for our flashlights. The house was bigger than some of the neighboring houses, yet the inside felt very cramped. Like there were a lot of rooms, but they were smaller, almost giving the house a maze-like feeling. Carlos stepped into another room away from me, and at that moment I was alone. I heard his voice say from another room, "Yo, there's still furniture everywhere." I responded, "Yeah, this place must have been abandoned in a hurry." Everything seemed ancient, like furniture in my grandma's house, only not used in years. I walked around the first floor some more, and came to a tiny corridor with a few doors that led to bedrooms. I entered one of the bedrooms, and it was incredibly cramped. The bed took up 80% of the room. I went through some of the drawers in the dresser, but they all seemed like they'd already been gone through. Same with the closet. Anything left behind besides this old furniture just looked like junk. I heard Carlos say he's going upstairs. I said back, okay. We were speaking at a volume that was just loud enough for each of us to hear. After checking out the other bedroom down on the first floor, which was equally cramped, I went back out to the corridor. There were 2 other doors, one that led to a bathroom, and then when I opened the final door, I was looking down a long stairway to a basement. I decided, fuck it, I'm walking down. I started descending the steps, each step squeaking and cracking under my weight. I got about halfway down the steps when I realized there was a faint glow coming from down there. I turned off my flashlight, and yes, there was still a little faint glow coming from down there. I should have turned and left in that moment like any normal person, but I do stupid things. Like I die first in a horror movie most likely. I continued down the stairs with my flashlight off, and when I got to the bottom, I looked around the walls separating the stairs from the rest of the basement, and I saw what was just barely lighting up the room. It was 2 tall candles sitting on a table, but that wasn't the first thing I noticed. What I saw first was what was next to that, and it was some kind of sofa rocking chair, and it was rocking. Someone was seated in it. It was facing away from the stairway. All I could see was a hand on one of the arms of the chair. I had to get out of there. I started going back up the stairs as quietly as I could, with each crack and squeak causing me to cringe in fear. I was halfway up the stairs now. I looked back down and could still see the faint glow of the candles, so I continued as quietly as I could. I was almost to the top, and one stair creaked especially loud. I paused for a moment, clenching my teeth so hard. I proceeded up the final steps and made it to the top. I turned to shut the door, but I noticed it was pitch black down there now. The thought of the candles having been put out sent a shiver down my spine. I quietly closed the door, and then I tiptoed around this cramped maze of a house until I found the stairway going upstairs. I stood at the bottom of the stairs and quietly called up to Carlos. He wasn't responding. I sighed and started quietly going up the stairs, repeating Carlos's name. Still no response. I had to go all the way up to the top of the stairs, repeating his name, and he still wouldn't respond. So I said, "If you're trying to scare me, stop joking around. There's someone in the basement. We need to get out of here." That got his attention because he stepped out from a dark room and asked if I was serious. I told him I'd explain outside, but that I'm not kidding. He followed me down the stairs. I was trying less so to be quiet now because I just wanted to get out of that house. We were heading back to the back door where we entered, but when we passed the corridor of the basement door, we both saw the silhouette of a man standing in front of the door. The time for sneaking around was over. I kept repeating "just go" as we booked it outside and ran for my car. We made it to the car in like 30 seconds. I was already winded by the time we made it back. I backed the car off that street and started driving us home. In the car ride was when I explained in detail what I saw. All Carlos kept saying was, "Yo, what the fuck?" to everything I said. He was in just as much disbelief as me. So while no, I don't think anyone legally lived in that house, I do think someone was squatting in there, down in that basement. Who knows who it was? Honestly, who cares? I just never returned anywhere near that street. I've always enjoyed late night walks. There's something about the stillness that makes everything feel simpler. I'm a welder by trade, been doing it for over 40 years now. I live alone on a big farm, just me and my dog Bosley. The house is too large for one person, but I never had the heart to downsize after my wife Maria passed away. My kids moved out years ago, and ever since cancer took her, it's just been me and Bosley. One night, after a long day in the shop, I decided to go for a walk. My property is pretty big, so just a single loop is usually enough to satisfy my craving. The air was cool, and Bosley trotted along beside me. Sometimes I think he likes me more than I like him. I've walked that loop hundreds of times, but as I was heading back toward the house, something caught my eye. I glanced up at the second-story window, the one that looks out from the bedroom Maria and I used to share. For a split second, I thought I saw something move. I stopped dead in my tracks, staring up at that window. There was no reason anyone should be in there. I hadn't been in that room in years, couldn't bring myself to. I felt my blood start to boil at the thought of some stranger breaking into my house. I wasn't going to stand for that. I rushed inside, my heart racing, and ran upstairs. The room was empty, just like I'd left it. No sign of anything out of place. I looked everywhere imaginable, but found nothing. Yes, I was pretty freaked out, but I was more angry than anything. I didn't take this kind of thing lightly. I figured I had just seen something that wasn't there. I stood there for a while, feeling foolish, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been there. The next night, I woke up to Bosley growling. He's a good dog, never barks unless there's something to bark at. I sat up in my bed, listening. That's when I heard creaking coming from upstairs. It could have just been the sounds of my old house, but my mind went directly to footsteps, which were coming from right above me. I'm sure you could guess which room is directly above mine. I debated grabbing my hunting rifle from downstairs, but didn't want to go that far. If it came down to it, I was fully confident that I could take whatever was up there hand to hand. I grabbed my flashlight and went to check. Again, nothing. The room was exactly the same, untouched. My anger was definitely starting to turn into anxiety at this point. Something didn't feel right in the house. The following night, I came downstairs to find the kitchen lights on. I know I turned them off before bed. I don't leave lights on. There was no question anymore. Someone was in my house. I started to panic. I called the police and told them I thought someone might be sneaking around. They came out, searched the house from top to bottom, but found nothing. They were nice about it, told me to call again if I needed them, but I could tell they didn't believe me. The next night was the worst by far. I couldn't sleep, so I decided to go upstairs and check the bedroom again. I don't know why. Maybe I thought it would settle my mind. But when I opened the door, I froze. There were clothes scattered all over the floor. Maria's clothes. I had packed them away after she died. Now they were everywhere. Something like this doesn't just happen randomly. And then I saw her. There was a woman standing in the doorway, just staring at me. I couldn't see her face clearly, but I could tell she wasn't Maria. She was too short. I don't know who she was, but she didn't belong there. I had never been so afraid in my life. Without thinking, I ran at her. She turned and bolted down the stairs and out the front door. By the time I got outside, she was gone. I searched the property with Bosley, but there was no trace of her. I didn't sleep that night. For months after that, I couldn't sleep. I was constantly on edge, convinced I heard footsteps upstairs at night. Every little noise set me off. I slept with my rifle next to my bed, terrified that I'd have to use it one night. Every little noise set me off. I debated calling my brother to come stay with me, but I wasn't going to do that. I was raised to always handle my own shit, so that's what I did. The nightmare didn't end though. One night, I was sitting in the living room when I noticed a figure standing in the yard, looking straight at me through the window. It was her again. My heart felt like it stopped. I grabbed my hunting rifle and ran outside, Bosley close behind. She was still there, just a silhouette in the moonlight, watching me. I fired a few warning shots into the air, hoping to scare her off. That was enough to get her to turn and run into the darkness, but it's not like that made me feel any better. I was literally being tormented by some random woman who was probably homeless. I couldn't even imagine why this was happening to me. I stood there for a long time, waiting to see if she'd come back. She never did. I haven't seen her since, but I know it's only a matter of time. I'm fully prepared to defend myself, but I don't think living in perpetual anxiety like this is sustainable. Thank God for Bosley. I have no idea what I'd do without him. I'll send an update if anything happens. I work for a catering service, which means I'm on the road a lot, usually late at night. I spend most of my time lugging stuff from place to place in this massive truck the company makes me drive. It's not the worst job in the world, but the hours suck, and it's not at all what I thought I'd be doing with my life. By the time I get home, I'm either so wired from caffeine that I can't sleep, or I pass out the second I hit the bed and stay that way for 12 hours. I was driving back home one night at like 2 a.m. It was nice to be driving my own car again. As I was approaching my house, I realized I had probably had one too many Red Bulls and there was no way I'd be able to sleep. On top of that, I hadn't eaten in hours and I was starving. There's a McDonald's right off the highway about 10 minutes from my house. It's usually my first choice when it comes to late night snacks since it's just so convenient. I'm not even one to gorge myself on fast food. I just occasionally get this weird craving that only a handful of fries can satisfy. It's obviously 24/7, and I figured some comfort food would be the perfect thing to help me wind down. I don't remember exactly what time it was, but it was definitely after 2 by the time I pulled into the drive-thru. There were a few cars ahead of me, which I was actually kind of surprised by. It's not like this McDonald's was a busy spot at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. As I was sitting there impatiently, I found myself staring off into space, wondering what was taking so long. That's when I noticed something strange. There was an old, beat-up Volkswagen with its windows tinted backed into a spot in the very corner of the lot. The McDonald's itself was only accepting drive-thru orders at this hour, so it didn't make sense why there'd be a car in the lot. There were reserved spots on the other side for employees, so it couldn't have been one of them. I figured it was maybe just someone eating in their car, which it probably was. I myself did that from time to time, so I guess I couldn't judge. It was just an odd sight, to be completely honest. I got my food and started driving away. I didn't want to go home just yet, but I also didn't want to just sit there idling my car. I began racking my brain, trying to think of a good place to scarf down the food. I live in a pretty lush area, so there's honestly a lot of options, but I didn't want to beat around the bush too much considering how late it was. There's a massive nature preserve literally down the street from my house. It's situated on a mountain and is essentially just an enormous forest. The kicker is that there's a scenic lookout point at the peak with a view of the city. There's a road that loops around the perimeter of the preserve and will take you right to the peak, which is nice during the day. After the preserve closes, though, the road is inaccessible to cars, but still a convenient path to get to the peak without having to walk through any woods. I used to go there with my friends from high school all the time. It was kind of a default spot when we wanted to be outside. We'd hang out, talk, smoke, or just appreciate the view. I actually hadn't been there in a while because I was just so busy working all the time, so I figured going there would deliver a much-needed nostalgia rush. When I got to the preserved parking area, it was completely empty. I say parking area because it wasn't a traditional parking lot with spaces for cars, but rather a big patch of gravel that veered off from one of the roads that ran past the preserve's border. Like I said, the actual preserve was closed, meaning I'd have to walk all the way up to the lookout spot from outside. Before I could even turn off the engine, I saw headlights pulling into the lot. That was unsettling enough on its own. Who else would be here at 2 a.m.? And then I realized what I was looking at. It was that same Volkswagen from the McDonald's parking lot. I was 100% certain of it. I parked a little ways away, and the engine cut off. I felt the unease start to pour in. What were the odds of that happening naturally? Had they followed me? My window was partially rolled down, and as far as I could tell, there was no music coming from that car, or at least none that I could hear. After nothing happened for a good minute or so, my fear started to fade. They were probably doing the same thing I was, out for some fresh air or a smoke. It's a pretty popular spot for that kind of thing, but I was just so weirded out considering how late it was. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, even though I concluded that it was just one of those unexplainable coincidences. I sat there for a minute, debating if I should just go home. I didn't want to leave, but I didn't want to be alone either. I picked up my phone and FaceTimed one of my close friends who lived a few minutes away. I told myself that if he didn't pick up, I'd just eat my food in the car and drive home. He was actually awake though, which I was a little surprised by. He said he had been up writing a paper. I convinced him to swing by and hang out for a bit. He was down. He said he'd be there in 10. While I waited, I kept my eyes on the Volkswagen. It still hadn't moved. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was being paranoid. When Sebastian finally pulled into the lot, I felt a lot better. We both got out of our cars and began walking up the path. Before the parking lot fully receded from view, I shot a glance backwards. The Volkswagen was still there, but I saw all 4 doors open at once. 4 guys stepped out. They just stood there for a few seconds, looking at each other. They weren't even talking, just looking around at each other. It was freaky. I nudged Sebastian, who realized what I was looking at. Before they could see us, we continued walking up the path so that the lot was obstructed from view. Alarm bells were going off in my head, but Sebastian didn't seem that concerned. He told me they were probably just going out to smoke. We kept walking, and by the time we got to the top, the city view was enough to take my mind off things. We always sat on this little rock wall that was supposed to keep people from wandering off the edge of the mountain. We sat there, eating and talking like we used to. It was nice. Of course, that nice feeling didn't last very long. We heard the sound of talking and laughter quickly approaching us. We turned around to see 3 guys walking towards us, sharing what looked like a blunt. They were acting friendly enough, which definitely calmed my nerves a little. Instead of finding their own spot, though, they walked right up to us like they wanted to start a conversation. The guy in the blunt was covered in tattoos and had a nose ring. He honestly looked pretty intimidating. He flashed half a smile before asking us if we wanted to smoke. We both said no, and one of the other guys laughed and called us pussies, to which Sebastian scoffed at. My curiosity got the better of me, and I blurted out a question about what they were doing at McDonald's. The guy holding the blunt dropped his smile instantly and narrowed his eyes, like he was caught off guard by my question. His 2 friends did the same, staring at us with cold expressions. They didn't say anything for an uncomfortably long time. That's when I remembered that there had been 4 guys in that car, not 3. One of them was missing. At that point, I was fully prepared to run. I knew Sebastian was thinking the same thing. Finally, the ringleader told us that he worked nights and that he had just gotten off. He pulled his hoodie up to reveal a McDonald's uniform, I think because he knew we wouldn't have believed him otherwise. He then went on to say he came to the spot every day after work to smoke with his friends. While that definitely calmed me down a bit, something about this situation was terribly off. I could tell Sebastian felt the same. We decided it was time to go. As we started walking down the path, Sebastian stopped and pointed into the trees. I followed his gaze and saw the 4th guy, half hidden in the darkness. He was holding something, but I couldn't make out what it was. I felt my heart start racing. The moment he saw us looking, he started moving. That's when we ran. We bolted down the path, glancing back to see him chasing us with the 3 other guys close behind. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst. I could hear their footsteps getting closer, but I didn't look back again. We finally made it to the parking lot, jumped into our cars, and floored it out of there. As I was speeding away, I could see those guys rushing to get in their car. I didn't feel comfortable driving home out of fear that I'd be leading them right to my house. I called Sebastian and told him we should meet back up on his street. We had a decent head start on them, and I don't think we were followed, but I wasn't taking any chances. When Sebastian and I met back up, we were still in shock about what the hell just happened. I don't know if they were trying to rob us or worse. I didn't know what to think. Sebastian showed me his phone and said he had snuck a picture of them while they weren't looking. He sent it to me, but I wasn't sure what to even do with it. I had off the next day, so I convinced Sebastian to come with me back to the McDonald's so we could at least report the employee. The next day, we approached a guy on the younger side in hopes that he'd listen to us. We showed him the picture and told him what happened, and his eyes widened. He told us something literally out of a horror movie. Apparently, that guy's girlfriend had also worked at that same McDonald's and had dumped him a few months ago. He didn't take it well and would harass her while she was working and stalk her after her shifts. He obviously got fired, but that didn't help. The police were involved shortly after, and there was a restraining order put in place. Apparently, he had been violating that restraining order because he was camping out in the parking lot. Sebastian and I were horrified. I have no idea why he'd decide to follow me, but it was clear that he was unhinged. I'm praying that the police catch him camping out in the parking lot, because then he'll actually be screwed. I just hope he doesn't recognize my car anywhere. It's only been a week, but I haven't been back to that McDonald's or the preserves since. Hopefully the police are able to do something, but that's out of my control. Forgive me if I don't remember every detail of the story. It happened a while ago. I grew up in Ardmore, Pennsylvania. Not much goes on around here, so finding things to do can be a challenge. In high school, a few friends and I would sneak into and explore old, abandoned buildings. That's the sort of thing we did at that age. I didn't realize how popular that kind of stuff is until many years later. Apparently, lots of people like to explore abandoned buildings. Anyway, there was this abandoned church that we'd been to a couple of times before. It was in Narberth. I actually remember the exact address, 198 Elmwood Avenue. The place was creepy, but it was kind of our go-to spot for late-night thrills. One fall evening, a few of us decided to hit the church and drink a little inside. It was a chilly night, and the air had that crisp bite to it. There were 6 of us, me, Luna, Gina, Johnny, Max, and Allie. The church sat behind an 8-foot chain-link fence, which we had to climb to get in. The doors were all boarded up, so we always went through a window on the side. Once you were inside, the first thing you noticed was the floor, or lack of one. The entire first floor was just dirt. It looked like someone had ripped out the floorboards years ago, leaving only a hole in the center where a set of concrete stairs led down to the basement. That's where we always ended up, down in the basement. The basement had 3 rooms, but only one had a door. The other 2 just had door frames. The first room we went into was the largest. There wasn't much in it, just some old furniture, broken chairs, a busted couch. I remember having to shush Johnny like 12 times because he was a lightweight, and the tiny bit of alcohol he had was making him really loud and antsy. Being in such a big group was always a plus though, and I felt much safer knowing we had numbers. We messed around for a while, drinking and laughing like we usually did. We might have had a speaker playing music, but I don't fully remember. Out of nowhere, a door slammed. I literally jumped. That's how loud it was. We froze, staring at each other with concerned expressions. At first, I thought one of us had closed the door by accident, but no one was near it. Almost immediately, Luna, Gina, and Johnny made a break for it, sprinting up the stairs, leaving me, Max, and Allie behind. We were the fearless ones, and none of us wanted to leave just yet. My heart was definitely pounding, I fully admit that, but I wasn't going to let the wind freak me out. I could tell Max and Allie were thinking the same thing. I don't know if it was curiosity or stupidity, but we decided to investigate. After standing in silence for a few minutes, the 3 of us crept over to open the door that had slammed shut. Behind it was a small room, and the first thing I saw was a dresser. The mirror on top of it was cracked, and there were red stains smeared across the surface. At first, I thought it was old paint or something, but when I got closer, I realized something terrifying. It wasn't completely dry. The stains still had that sticky sheen to them, like whatever it was hadn't been there for long. I felt the hairs on my neck stand up, and I was having second thoughts about not leaving sooner. Someone, or dare I say something, had recently been in this room. Then I saw the picture. There was an old photo on top of the dresser, a black and white shot of a woman in a wedding dress. She was smiling, but there was something off about it. The whole thing gave me a bad feeling. I backed away, but just as I turned, we heard another noise. This time, it wasn't the door. It was coming from one of the other rooms. It was coming from the room we had just been in. That's when Max and Allie both decided they'd had enough. I wasn't going to argue with them. We grabbed our stuff and ran out of there as fast as we could. When we climbed back over the fence and hit the pavement, none of us said a word. After jumping the fence, I turned around, and I could swear I saw the silhouette of a person standing in the open window. I still pray that by some minuscule chance my mind was just playing tricks on me, but I'll never know for sure. My friends and I never went back there together for as long as we remained friends. I've actually been back to that church myself, although it wasn't a church anymore. By the time I got around to checking it out again, it was completely demolished. I still have no idea what we saw that night. I'm just glad my friends were there to witness it with me. Had I been alone, I might doubt this whole thing even happened. If anyone wants to do some digging, go ahead. I was never able to find out anything online, but I wouldn't be surprised if that church has a history I don't know about.